Gauteng Premier David Makhura has denied that the provincial executive and the budget committee played any role in the Life Esidimeni decision. Makhura has been testifying at the inquest today. Over 140 mentally ill patients died back in 2016, to remind you, after they were moved from Life Esidimeni to other NGOs. It was later determined that they were ill-equipped to take care of them. Moloko Moloto has been following this inquest, and a heartbreaking inquest as well, Moloko, as we take a look at what the former Premier actually had to say. And from the sense I'm getting from what you have, we will hear from what the former Premier had to say. He said, she said, who wrote documents, who signed off on documents. I feel like we're passing the blame here.
Hello, Gareth Edwards. Well, the former Premier of Gauteng, David Makhura, today finally taking to the witness stand, obviously following the testimony given 2 weeks back by the former Health MEC, Gauteng Makhura, who claimed that the decision specifically to terminate the Life Esidimeni contract was made by the so-called the Premier Budget Committee that was chaired by Premier David Makhura in 2014, around there, shortly after Makhura was appointed or elected as Premier. Now, the decision obviously led to what we now know, people having died. But David Makhura, echoing the sentiments of Barbara Creasy, who at the time was the MEC for Finance, and Barbara Creasy, by virtue of being the MEC of Finance, was also part of that budget committee. Creasy said yesterday, telling this inquest that is now being heard by the Pretoria High Court, that it can't be true that that decision was taken by that particular committee. We hear David Makhura today as well saying that what we were told as the committee was simply a decision taken by the Department of Health during a presentation that was made by Gauteng Makhura and the other officials of the department, that they have taken a decision to reduce the number of bed usage. You would recall at the time the department was spending money on Life Esidimeni, and they also indicated that that will save government about 50 million rand. There was nothing about them having to terminate the contract of Life Esidimeni. But secondly, they would also obviously take about 20% of the patients who were in Life Esidimeni, place them specifically within institutions that are owned by government. But we know that they were taken to NGOs, some of them ill-equipped, some of them not even licensed. And David Makhura saying he was never made aware in that meeting that they would take patients to those NGOs. But let's listen to David Makhura as he was saying that if the decision to terminate was made during that particular committee meeting, it should have been formalized, it should have been in writing. Because it was never in writing, such a decision doesn't exist.
There is no structure of the provincial government, the executive or the PBC that took that decision, because if that was the case, it would have been communicated differently, my lady, in line with section 140 of the Constitution, because council has been insisting about his instruction, I make this point. That there is no such decision made, because a decision of that nature, which would have been made, would have had in line with section 140, subsection 1 and subsection 2. That decision would have been, if I may read, my lady, if you allow me.
Yes, we can, quickly, please.
That a decision, so here we're talking about executive decision, because I have heard the repeat of this, that a decision of any such a decision would have been by the Premier would have to be in writing if it is taken in terms of legislation or it has legal consequences. And secondly, that is subsection 2, a written decision by the Premier must be countersigned by another executive council member if that decision concerns a function to that other member.
So committees and signing and countersigning and in writing, that seems to be the issue at the moment. But I suppose also what we need to talk about, and quite rightly as well, is the former Premier just giving a sense of how he felt when he heard the news. In the beginning, what was it, 36 people losing their lives? I don't even think the former Premier, knew it was going to get this bad.
Yeah, so the decision was taken, it would seem, by the Department of Health in 2014 that they are going to terminate the Life Esidimeni contracts, and they would place those patients in NGOs that are within the communities. Now, David Makhura says that he learned in, I think it was on the 13th of November or September, if memory serves me well, in 2016, through his former spokesperson, Phumla Sikhonyane, who whispered in his ears because he was on an outreach government program in the Vaal. Phumla went to him and said, Premier, the MEC of Health has just announced in the form of a reply in the legislature that 36 mental care patients have died in the province. He was responding to a parliamentary question. Are you aware of this? And he says, I was not aware of it because I was chairing a meeting. I said, let me finish this and I will attend to it. He says immediately he phoned Dani Mahlangu, the MEC, to say, let us meet. And they met, I think, after 2 days. In that particular meeting, Premier Makhura says Mahlangu brought a whole entourage of senior officials to explain. And he says for the first time, that is Makhura, he was hearing in that particular meeting in 2016, after 30-something people have died already, he was learning that they had actually been taken to the NGOs, something that he says was never mentioned during that budget committee meeting that he chaired. So he wanted to know why NGOs now, and the explanation he says was given was that they were, as the department, implementing a national policy that was saying that mental care patients must be placed in community-based NGOs. But that is not the explanation, because he, as well as Barbara Creasy, are saying that Mahlangu told them that they will remove from Life Esidimeni those patients, place them in government-owned institutions. Let's listen to him.
In the first instance, I was quite livid. I want to say that I was quite livid. So we have 36 patients who have died in our facilities. In my head, that's what it is said they are in the NGO. So I was quite livid. How does this happen? And secondly, precisely how many people died? Under what circumstances did they die? So we go into the meeting. The MEC brings a delegation. The HOD is there in the meeting, but there are also officials from the mental health unit or division of the department, including the chair of the advisory board on mental health. So I asked these questions very vigorously.
So livid about the deaths, and I'm sure many people would expect the former Premier to be livid about the deaths on this. Moloko, where do we go to with this next? Because yesterday you mentioned quite rightly Barbara Creasy, today David Makhura. Who else are the big players we're looking out for in this?
Well, obviously, as you are aware, these proceedings are taking place virtually because we don't have the benefit of being there personally. So as the presiding officer was saying, thank you, Mr. Makhura. So Makhura has done with his evidence. What is now, apparently there's going to be one professor. I couldn't get his name properly. I'm not too sure whether it could be Professor Makhuba or any professor or any person who perhaps was somehow had knowledge of that. But it's a matter that I can try to verify. But it certainly is not a politician who will be taken to the witness.
And it's certainly not over, and I think that's the most important part as well. It's not suddenly ending today because David Makhura was there. Moloko Moloto, thank you very much indeed. Let's not forget the tragedy of what was the story. So many families to this day still don't know exactly what happened to their loved ones, and many of them were incredibly vulnerable, dealing with mental health issues, relying on Life Esidimeni and then what was supposed to be NGOs, what was supposed to be government, to protect them and their families. A terrible tragedy. We won't forget about it, and of course we'll stay on that. So will Moloko Moloto.